Are we good?
She just gave us the thumbs up.
Okay.
Tell Laura that
It is
it's in the audience.
6.
Oh, there's no
What do we
audio?
have for
Yeah.
time?
6:03.
Anyone? 6:03?
3, yep.
Okay.
I think she just turned it on.
All right.
Is there audio now?
I think we're good.
If anyone watching this remotely is having problems with the audio, we should ask them to let us know. He just got a message saying.
From Abby, yeah, she's not getting audio.
Abby, can you hear us?
She's frozen.
Can you hear us, Abby? One of you may have to ask, because she can't see me. I've been.
Abby,
kept
can you
off.
hear us now? Oh, she's trying to text me.
But the
Oh,
question
she
is,
said she can't hear anything.
and that's through Zoom. The other question is public access TV and the YouTube channel. Did I hear someone say they got a message that the audio was not working there?
But I guess it was from Abby. I misunderstood.
Yeah, it's Abby. It's not.
Okay, okay. No.
Should I check with, ask
Yeah.
Laura?
We should.
That's not, yep.
I wonder if she can see us.
And to all those watching on public access TV and the YouTube channel, we're experiencing a technical difficulty with our Zoom connection for our board member. We'll be with you in just a couple of minutes.
What do we go on the Ellsworth School Department page? What do we,
So Laura just
On the
checked
city
the
page?
Zoom, and it's working with audio. But it may be that Abby's
connection?
connection is not good enough to receive the audio.
Should
what
we
do- so
start?
what do we do?
And hope she is able to
Okay, hold on.
join?
I just got a message from Jen. She said YouTube audio is working, so
Okay.
the YouTube audio is working. It must be whatever's happening with Zoom.
I'll just tell her to join the YouTube then. Tell Abby to join YouTube.
She can hear us that way. I don't know if she's going to be able to communicate is the only thing.
Yeah.
Oh, she went inside somewhere.
She call in, Dan, and I'll be on.
Oh, she switched locations,
Mhm.
so she may have.
Check with Laura on that.
She calls in, I can see her.
Yeah, everything's working,
Mhm.
except for her.
If I'm not set up that she can call that, are we?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think she might be trying to find a better connection spot.
Mhm.
We all got the same link, so.
I could set up a
Okay, thank you.
telephone conference.
Oh, I hear
Hear
her now.
something.
Here's something.
We hear you,
Can you guys
Eddie.
hear me?
Yes.
Ah, there you are.
Can you hear us?
Abby, try turning your video off.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Try turning your video off.
I don't have a radio on.
No, your video. Try turning your
I
video
just
off.
texted her.
Yep, thank you.
Oh,
Sometimes if your internet connection is unstable, if you turn the video off, the audio will get more oomph.
okay, guys, say something so I know you're there.
We're here.
Hello?
Much better.
We can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I'm just gonna watch and if needed.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thanks,
Thank you, Abby.
All right. Shall we start?
Yes.
It's
6:08 now.
6:08, okay. Let's, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is a discussion for the plan for return to school for this fall. Mr. Higgins?
Thank you, Kelly. I will start. Just to let people know, I know we announced it at the Pack the Backpack promotion, and we've announced it at our previous meetings. Tonight is a workshop to discuss a draft framework and plan for the return to school in the fall of 2021 in September, a little less than a month away. There is not a vote this evening. The board will be voting on a final plan a week from Thursday, August 12th, 2021, in a meeting to be held here at 6 o'clock. So tonight's meeting is for discussion purposes. What I will do is run through an overview of the draft plan, some of the general pieces that went into the planning, some of the sources of information, and that will lead into a conversation. I think in general terms, one thing I think we all want to remember, some of the most pertinent questions coming from parents and staff and students are we going to be back in school in person? You know, I think we've been clear that that is the ultimate plan, that is the ultimate goal, to have all students, all staff in school in person 5 days a week. Another question is what's going to happen with masks. I think we go through this plan and reserve the discussion on masks to the end so that everybody gets a chance to hear the other components of the plan. And certainly there'll be some conversation on testing. So if that's okay with members of the board, we'll proceed in that fashion. So what I was able to send you today is a current draft of plan, and would like to just run through it. It's set up into sections that talk about planning reference information, continuum of instructional models for 21-22, and some operational structures, which includes school health and safety protocols and some general guidelines. Interestingly, when you're looking at moving forward, again, we're planning to have everybody back in school to start the year. One of the things we want to make sure we say up front is what's being presented tonight for a draft is based upon current information, and as we all know from experience and what we're seeing currently, that information can change rapidly. So we need to be prepared to act if necessary to respond to those changes. The other basic premise behind this draft plan is not only are we looking to maximize the amount of in-person instruction for students, is that we need to ensure that we consider and provide for the physical, social, and emotional health and safety of all students, staff, and visitors. Okay. So that's some of the general premises that this was built upon. With planning references, one piece that I would like to say right up front is last year, through the entire school year, we were operating under a state of civil emergency, and in the Department of Education framework for coming back to school and returning to school, there were 6 health and safety requirements. And we used that word a lot last year. Those were requirements under the state of civil emergency. When the state of civil emergency was declared ended, those requirements became recommendations. So the 6 health and safety requirements are now recommendations, they're not requirements. But we've continued to use that document because there are some of those former requirements that we're recommending stay in place. We're also looking at the United States CDC guidance for COVID-19 prevention in K-12 schools from July 9th. Maine Department of Education amended health and safety guidance from July 15th. And by the way, for people watching, these are all available on the various websites. Interim public health recommendations for fully vaccinated people, July 27th. Reference to the American Academy of Pediatrics COVID-19 guidance for safe schools. Conversations with our school health advisor, reflections on year 2021 school year experiences, and feedback from school staff members, which we'll talk about a little more as we go through this. So with all those pieces leading into this, what we've put together is a model that talks about, in essence, 3 different instructional levels. And I'll talk about a potential 4th one, which is contingent upon a final decision on masks. But the first level, which coincides with the Department of Education's green from last year, is full in-person instruction for all students and staff 5 days per week. That's where we intend to start. A second level, depending upon the mask conversation, which will come a little bit later, would be a full person instruction with increased mitigation and health and safety measures, which may include masks. The third level would be the hybrid model that we spent most of last year in. We'll talk briefly about that in just a minute. And the fourth level would be a full remote learning, which is where we started a year ago in March of 2020. So, pertinent to these pieces, again, our goal is to start the school year with all staff and all students in our buildings in a model of full in-person instruction 5 days a week and to maximize in-person instruction throughout the school year. For all of the levels that I just talked about, levels 1 through 4, unless medically necessary, and we're talking about documentation from a physician being required, or requirements from a student's IEP or 504 plan, or due to the required isolation or quarantine of a student or staff member of a positive COVID-19 case, virtual or remote learning will not be an option for students when in-person instruction is available. If you remember last year, full remote was an option throughout the year. What's on the table tonight is to not have that as an option except for those specified circumstances. The other piece is, it's important to know for students receiving special services, there will continue to be the individualized remote learning plans that clearly and transparently detail how and with what frequency remote services will be delivered if that student qualifies. So, again, under the first level, this is everybody back in school, and that's presuming that we go back to school with the masking conversation being masks are not required for fully vaccinated people and strongly encouraged for those who are not fully vaccinated. We'll talk about that option a little bit later. If you were to go to a level 2, depending upon where the mask piece would be, if you went with that first option, level 2 would be continue to be in-person instruction for all students 5 days per week, but would then move towards masking. And that's one of your options. One of the things that came out in conversations with some of our staff members were, rather than move directly to a hybrid model if conditions worsen, would be to move to a model where we increase the mitigation measures. Level 3, the hybrid piece, we've spent most of the year with that. That does not require a lot of description. We'd be talking maroon and gray groups. The only difference would be no fully remote option. And certainly a full remote learning piece, this would be a situation where if there was a directive of state government, like there was in March of 2020, that we close schools and go fully remote, that would be a scenario where we envision that. So those would be the general instructional models. Again, we're leaning towards maximizing the model where everybody's in school 5 days a week in person. Health and safety protocols, through our conversations, through our work, social distancing and spacing. Distancing and spacing does continue to be an important tool in diminishing the spread of COVID-19. It went from 6 feet last year, it went down to 3 feet. Now what we're being advised is that while all individuals in schools should space to the extent possible with a goal of 3-foot distance, distancing should not come at the expense of returning students to school in the classroom. The guidance we're receiving, and it came from the briefing from Dr. Shaw last Thursday, do the best you can to space to the maximum amount that you can, but don't make that be a barrier to bringing students back to school. One of the other pieces that goes along with that will lead into the masking conversation is, with that understanding, we need to look at layering mitigating measures to help reduce the spread. But that's one recommendation in this draft plan, is to maintain that spacing 3 feet to the extent possible, but do not let it be a barrier. We're also recommending that the symptom screening at home before coming to school for all students and staff continue. Again, I think this was an appropriate thing to do last year as a requirement. We found that many people honored that requirement and kept their students and staff members stayed home, and that certainly helped contribute to the low number of cases that we had in our schools. Return to school requirements for all students and staff. Again, if you're meeting any of the symptoms on that screening checklist, if you're still meeting them, we encourage you, please stay home, and in many cases consult with your physician upon whether you should get a test or not. Hand washing and hand sanitizing hygiene will continue to be emphasized in schools. We will have the hand sanitizer where washing is not available at all entrances. Students and staff will be trained and encouraged to use it when they enter the building, when they enter a classroom, when they enter and leave lunch, enter and leave the restrooms, etc. We will continue our practice with water fountains. Water fountains will not be available to drink from schools. We will have the bottle filling stations where students should use their own bottles to fill up, and bottles should not be shared. In the unfortunate circumstance that we have a positive COVID-19 case in our schools, we will continue to follow the standard operating procedure from the CDC, which we followed all of last year. Something that came out late this afternoon, it's my understanding that SOP is going to be updated between now and the beginning of school. So stay tuned on what that means. So those would be some health and safety pieces. Under general guidelines, some of this is a reiteration, but again, we're emphasizing the hand washing and hand hygiene. And this will be a discussion for later. We'll continue to seek resources for potential implementation of a screening or testing program. We're in the final stages of hiring replacement school nurses, and I would like to have them involved in that conversation. Right now, we're looking at having school meetings, parent-teacher meetings, IEPs, 504 meetings, etc., to be scheduled to occur in person. However, we do have some scenarios whereby there may be parents who wish to attend those meetings in a remote fashion. We're going to look at that option. One thing that we found through reviewing what happened last year, we found that with the remote option, there was increased attendance at those types of meetings for parents. That's a positive outcome that's come from this. Public events and facility usage, again, that's a to-be-determined piece depending upon where we go with masking and health and safety guidelines. Our schools are used on a regular basis for public facility usage, and sometimes you have large groups in there. Whatever we do in schools probably is something that we should consider mirroring for facility usage. As with last year, students and staff will enter buildings through assigned and clearly identified entries. Traffic patterns in the schools will be governed by protocols and signage that are set up by our administrators. We already talked about water bottles. Individual computers and laptops and devices, the recommendation is for us to continue to have those go home daily for grades 5 through 12. Devices for grades K through 4, the recommendation is that they go home as needed. Middle and high school athletics will follow guidelines provided by the Maine Principals Association. This is something that we're included as a recommendation here because it's possible through the year, as trends change and evolve, that the Principals Association may make some changes. It may be to our advantage to say that we're going to follow those. And again, we did all last year. When they changed, we came to the board and the board approved those. We may want to make a blanket statement on that this year so we can follow them throughout the year. Another piece is to have PLC dismissal time at 1 o'clock on Fridays. We did do that through the course of this year. It was very helpful, very beneficial. And through the work we need to do through the course of this year, it makes sense to move that to 1 o'clock rather than the 1:15 and 1:30. Transportation, morning drop-off and afternoon pickup. This is one piece I think it's important for families to hear. All riders regarding a vaccination status are required to wear masks on public transportation, including school transportation. That's our buses, that's our vans. That's for any school activity, and any driver, any student rider, or any additional staff members who are supervising students. That is not optional, that is a mandate. So, even if you're fully vaccinated and you're a student who's 17 or 18, and you ride the bus, you're required to wear a mask. We'll continue to clean transportation vehicles with CDC and MDOE Transportation Department guidelines. And our individual schools will continue to have specific guidelines for morning drop-off, building access and afternoon dismissal, and building exit for bus students, walking students. And that's some information that our administrators will be able to give you. With facilities and maintenance, we will continue to clean and disinfect schools consistent with CDC guidelines, and that's whether we have a case or not. And high-frequency touch areas will be cleaned multiple times during the day, again, consistent with CDC guidelines. And we put that phraseology consistent with guidelines in there because, as we know, those can change. Food service, again, consistent with CDC guidelines. Physical distancing, as close to 3 feet as possible, will be used in our schools and cafeterias. One thing I noticed in a document that we received late this afternoon, which was a frequently asked question document from the Director Shaw presentation, folks who are fully vaccinated are not required to space 3 feet while eating. That's a new piece. School breakfast and lunches will be provided and served in school cafeterias or designated lunch areas. We include the designated lunch areas because, for example, at the high school, they don't not only have the cafeteria, they also have students eat in the cafe. And one thing they learned from last year was that having that area in the all-purpose room as an area for overflow or specific groups of students worked out well, and they may continue to maintain that. So we mentioned designated lunch areas. Again, Hand washing and hand sanitizing prior to and after eating is going to be emphasized. This next piece is more of a PSA than a health and safety piece. As we know and reported at a previous meeting, breakfast and lunches are going to be provided free to all students in 2021-22. One of the pieces that is a challenge on that is that means many people may not feel the need to fill out the free and reduced lunch application. If Ray Daler were here, he'd tell you he's been trying for 25 years to get us to the 50% level, which gives us increased funding to support programs through title services. We haven't quite gotten there. With the free breakfast and lunches for all students, there is going to be a questionnaire or information sheet coming out. Mr. Daly's going to send a communication out. We encourage all families to fill that out, even if you don't think you would be eligible. It's confidential, nobody will know about it, but the higher your level of eligibility for free and reduced lunch, the greater opportunity you have to get funds to supplement the services and programs that we provide. There'll be more information coming out on that. So, in a nutshell, with the exception of the conversation on masks, with the conversation on pool testing, that is an overview of a program and plan for returning to school.
Will we be reinstating the use of lockers?
We
this
actually
year?
already did that.
Okay, I know that some classes were still not using them at the end of the year last year.
I will look to the principal, and my understanding is we reinstituted them, and they were available for students to use.
Well, it may have been that some teachers didn't assign them to students, because I know my student was not using a locker last
Okay.
year.
And again, that's a question certainly you could ask any of the principals, but,
And
my
would-
understanding was, and I'm looking out here, that we were going to use them as the year ended last year.
Right.
And I presume that's our plan moving forward. We didn't talk about it, but I presume that's our plan moving forward.
And would students be assigned cohort colors prior to the start of the school year, so in case of a quick turnaround?
Well, we don't want to tempt fate, Beth. But I think if you look at our student information system, existing students were already assigned a cohort color. Those still exist.
Okay.
So in the event that we get to a point where we have to consider moving to a hybrid, there's a structure in place
Right.
for that. Certainly any new students coming in or new kindergarten students would have to be included in that mix.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a mechanism by which that can happen.
Okay. Awesome.
But I will stress, we don't want to get to that.
Great.
On that same line,
Yes, Ms. Abby?
on that same line, I think a lot of parents want to know that our middle school students are going to be assigned a locker. Not just that it's an optional thing, simply that it is a definite thing that our kids are going to be assigned a locker. Because there was a lot of problems last year. And, we need to plan our next school year. And, we all need rolling bags. We need to be buying those right now.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Abby. That's the plan, is to have everyone assigned a locker. We instituted the use of lockers towards the end of the year when we came back to full in person. Some teachers already had spaces for kids and the system was already working well, or what they thought was working well. So we didn't say you have to do this, it was optional, but certainly the plan is for every student to have a locker.
Thank you, Erica.
Oh, do you have a question?
No, I said
She said thank you.
Are you good, Abby? She's frozen.
Is it time to discuss now about other things?
I think unless you have specific questions on these pieces,
Can
I was wondering if we could hear from the administrators, the building administrators. I know they've all spoken with their teachers and have feedback from them as to what they feel would be best going into the school year would be.
With regard to what, Kelly?
Masking and pool testing.
anything else that you feel relevant that was
Yes.
not covered?
That would be great, Amy. Thank you.
Good evening. At HCTC, I actually did a Google survey and asked teachers pretty specific questions. They definitely all want 5 days a week, for sure. They were not unanimous on masking. I had one who wanted unvaccinated masked, and the rest wanted choice, and one was unsure. She said she could go either way. So the majority were for family choice. They are very, very worried about the social emotional aspect of the child. Several in their comments talked about how much they lost not seeing kids and kids not seeing them and feeling kindness back and forth with their teachers and how important that piece is. So they're really hoping we can start the year normal, or as normal as one could be. They very much appreciate safety and want the other health and safety factors in place, the continued sanitizing of hands, entering and exiting the building, those kinds of things they still want firmly in place, but they very much were in favor of, with the exception of the two. And that was all my staff. That was not just teachers. That was my hourly employees as well as my teachers. So I want to make sure that's clear too. For us, one of the biggest things for us is we had a small population of 100% remote learners, but CTE directors across the state, as well as my staff, feels very strongly that we not offer a remote option this year, with the exception of students who are under quarantine. We're imposing the absence on the family. And we feel like if we're imposing the absence on the family, that we have the responsibility to provide them with their education. But for career and tech ed, our certification requirements are not on waivers this year. They're not changed. So having them in person and not remote will allow us to provide CTE in the manner in which it's intended to be provided. I don't know if that answers the gist of your questions, the big ticket items. That's kind of where HCTC falls. I mean, we're of course much smaller than our other schools, but that's where we land.
That's great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And at the high school, we also did a survey, and our survey results were really just like HCTC, pretty much the same exact results. One thing that I will add is the last 7 weeks, we were, for the most part, about 90% of our students were 5 days a week in person. You saw from the data that I gave you last month, there were some students that made some huge jumps from where they were 7 weeks left in school until the end of the school year and end of summer school. You know, and that data just tells us that the 5-day in-person, you know, is the best instructional. And my faculty and staff really feel strongly about that, and I do too. And that's why we're part of this plan. That was our #1 goal, is to have everybody back. But yeah, we're, you know, taking, you know, the feedback from the leadership team, and then taking feedback from our faculty and staff. This is what we came up with. I think it's a solid plan, and I think parents and everybody will be happy with it. Again, you know, depending where we are a month from now, because you never know, but 5 days a week is definitely where we want to be, and everyday instruction in our students in our classrooms.
Did your staff, Dan, mention any, did you ask your staff at all about the masking aspect of things?
Yeah, that was mixed. You know, masking if you're not vaccinated, masking even if you are vaccinated, that was mixed. It was all over the place. So there wasn't a strong feeling one way or the other.
Thank you.
So I met with my advisory committee that I have at the middle school, and they pretty much echo the same things that you've heard from Mr. Clifford and Mrs. Bowles about wanting a normal opening, quote unquote, at whatever normal looks like now, but no masks, ideally no masks. They are very concerned about the social emotional well-being of our students. Kids coming back with some anxiety and some nervousness in the middle school. They're very much concerned about that. And they would like to be back in the cafeteria for lunch, if possible, and giving our middle school students that socialization and that experience, because it was a challenge last year for us, for sure. And really, my staff wants to get back to our kindness starts with me motto. They want to get back to rejuvenating the things that we do on a normal basis, and working with kids to come back together again, kind of like we did last spring. So that is kind of their ideal hope, is that we would open in a normal way without masks, 5 days in person. They feel very strongly about the no remote option, which I think you heard from me all last spring as well. It is really challenging, and it wasn't that successful for us last year as a middle school to have the fully remote kids. We only had about a handful that it was successful for. So that was really challenging, and so they have a very strong opinion that we should not offer a fully remote option, much like Mr. Higgins has in the document. So everything that my staff had to say was echoed in that document.
Thank you, Erica.
Any questions? Okay.
I gathered feedback the same way with the K-4 leadership team. And so mine are kind of split because we are the K-4 staff. Our students don't have the ability to be vaccinated. So there's two main trains of discussion that we had, and one was family choice. Give families the choice to mask children. And then the other piece was the spacing is a big issue in K2, I'm going to say, because, you know, you're teaching reading, you're trying to do phonics instruction, you can't see the mouth, you can't do those pieces. So there's a piece of, teachers, they really want to do a quality job with that, and they're not able to see the mouth, they're not able to hear the sound. So that's something that's concerning to them. But the family choice was a big option because of the population that we have. The other piece of that was a concern about spacing. That was really difficult at the K2 level to manage and maintain and try to offer quality instruction as well. So I have a pocket of teachers at that specific grade level saying, if we mask, if I didn't have to do a state spacing, I would mask, so that I could be closer to kids and being able to hear them better and doing those things versus the masks and then. So that's kind of the two trains of thoughts for the K4 pieces on masking. Even my remote only teachers felt by the end of the school year, remote instruction wasn't ideal for kids. We've had some really outstanding teachers shine in the remote instruction area, and even by come April, the stamina of students electronically on the device to do that, they just waned right off, and they felt that someone going strong in December and February, by the time they get March and April, they felt that they've lost their kids. Attendance started to drop off. They felt that kids weren't connecting as well, that it was kind of, they didn't have the wherewithal to be able to continue to be on the device. So for them, they felt that remote really wasn't the best option, and they don't want to offer that component as an option for parents. Any questions? I know my masking thing was a little bit weird, but it's just hard with K4 because there's K1 is different than fourth grade, you know what I mean? And it's hard to teach reading and the phonics and the phonetics and the, your mouth when you're making the sounds. And, so they're trying to get closer to kids to be able to do that, but they also, feel that there should be choice. So there was not a strong no mask or mask, but it was more about choice. And if I had to choose one, I would mask and then have less spacing. So that was kind of their feedback.
That's great. Any feedback regarding pool testing?
Not really from staff. I think they were uncomfortable with it. I'm going to be honest. Okay. When that came out, there was a lot of discussions. I didn't ask them directly though, but I had a lot of discussions with staff about that with me. There's a sense of uncomfortableness about that. So I would say that's kind of how I would word it. I didn't directly ask them, Kelly. Okay. Right. Thank you.
I'd like to have Carol come up because principals did a great job getting information through their leadership groups and their staff. Carol Ann also, our special ed director, also
Yes.
did gather information from all special ed employees,
Yeah.
or all who responded. So there might be some overlap here, but it's an additional perspective.
I think that's really important to know that there is overlap. The same people that they're talking to are the same people I'm talking to. I'm just looking at the subset of the special educators, and I sent a survey out, and I should have brought my glasses here so you guys can watch me look.
We're all there, Carol.
I was very specific in asking, are you in favor of unvaccinated people in schools being required to wear masks? And I had a 42% no on that, nearly 43, and a 57%, I got it backwards. I had a 42% yes and a 57% no. The second question that I asked was, are you in favor of all people in schools having the freedom of choice to wear masks, whether they are vaccinated or unvaccinated? That, again, it's 42 people I'm looking at. 66.7% of them responded that they are in favor of freedom of choice, and 33% said no, they're not in favor of that. If you look at everything that I broke down, you can kind of parse out who the respondents are, and about 47.6% of them were K through 4. At EHS, I had 35.7% people responding, and 16.7% of the respondents were from EMS. There's also fewer employees at EMS when you look at that overall number of 42 in just the special education department. But it looks like the greatest concern really about and response is from the K through 4 group. That's at 26% working in the life skills setting. Behavior setting also, they were responded, 28% of them worked there. And about, sorry, I should have asked a question differently. About half of them are in the resource setting. So there's a wide variety of people answering when you look at that. And again, the split's not really huge. I want to go back to the second question about the freedom of choice, and it was 66.7% said yes, they're in favor of that. But when you look at that and break it down by school, by grade, and by where they actually work, again, most of the respondents were K through 4, and the concerns, the kind of cool part that I have, and I heard these guys, I'll say it, but I have it here in writing. The concerns are really about what about the Delta variant. A lot of students need normal. It's confusing because the kids haven't had masks over the summer. We did have, when the civil emergency ended on July 1st, our extended school year services for special education had not yet started at that time. So we went with it is optional, it is your choice, except for on transportation, you have to wear your mask. And there were some, I gotta really compliment the little kids. Some of those little guys came in and they had their masks on and you could see them adjust them appropriately. Some staff chose to mask. And I didn't myself, and I'm not there every day for this, but I didn't witness any sort of split in those who were masked or not masked. Again, that's anecdotal, that's just this summer, but I can't tell you what it was like to hear the little kids say to the teachers that it was nice to see their smile. I remember one little kid, and the teacher who was repeating this to me had tears in her eyes saying, they said they didn't know I had a smile. And that to me was really profound. I didn't know you had a smile. And that's coming from someone, I think it was a first grader, I'm not specifically sure what the grade was. But I have a lot of people in these answering. I don't have worries. I'm really worried about providing remote services. I'm concerned about the health of our kids, and with the Delta variant, they're concerned about transmitting that to their own children who are also below the age of 12 and have no choice to vaccinate. So the other thing they talked about is PPE, and that for certain classrooms, it really needs to be required, not an option. So I think that covers, having enough ed techs was a concern, another surge in infections. I think that was it. I shared it to you too. I pretty much covers the comments, I think.
Yep.
Tried to pick. Any questions about that? I wouldn't grade me on the questions, by the way, but but I think it got the point across.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate the effort of putting together questions to
Sure.
ask. That's the most important part.
I don't like not knowing things.
Thank you, Carolyn.
we had an advisory group, I'd love to share the information from
I
you.
would love to hear it.
As I had shared with the board, I formed a advisory group of teachers to meet with, in part to debrief on the past year and get input for the coming year, but have evolved that into something even more. There's going to be a group that meets monthly over the course of the year. We met for the first time on July 26th. We're meeting again on Monday, kind of as a follow-up to this meeting. But what I've got is 11 teachers from across all of our schools, 2 from HCTC, I believe 3 from each of the other schools. Did have a conversation with Director Sargent and Adult Ed, and we both agreed, and this was her recommendation, that she didn't feel that she needed to have a staff member be part of it at this point in time. But we met, and what we talked about was a debrief of the school year, and it was kind of nice because, when you look at, Amy's able to talk to all of her staff, it's a relatively small number, but if you look at everyone else, it's a much larger group. So the conversation I had was able to be a sit-down conversation, just a discussion, so we could get a little more specific than you might be able to get in a survey. But some of the things that you heard from the principals and directors were echoed in this meeting. Some of the comments with regard to masks, one of our teachers said, when I was in the store this summer in Hannaford, there were some students that I saw and I wasn't really sure that they were my students because I hadn't seen them without a mask all year. So, there's some of those pieces that it's nice to be without masks because it allows that personality piece to come out. There were some pieces, and the debrief wasn't completely negative. There were some positive pieces. There were some learnings from using the technology, but a general consensus was that Zoom and virtual learning are good for the short term, but not for the longer term. The longer you're doing it, the diminishment of effectiveness. Even one of our staff members said, my skills as a teacher diminished the longer that I was teaching virtually. Obviously, some of the things that they wanted to talk about for coming back. This group, interestingly, the consensus was they would prefer to see masks be optional to start the year. Again, this is people from across all the schools, and I tried to cross-section departments that they came from. Some of the reasons that they want masks to be optional were anxiety and the social and emotional impact on students. One of the teachers talked about, especially with the younger ones, the proper fit sometimes is a challenge because of the size of the masks. Now, that's separate from what you heard Carol Ann say about the summer program, so it's different populations perhaps. But articulation was a challenge for the younger children. They did have questions. If it's optional, we're wondering how many parents will have their children opt to wear a mask. I think the number might be higher than we think if the board opts to go in that direction, but I don't know that. The other thing that was clear amongst this group was the preference is to return to school with masks being optional. But if conditions warrant moving towards a hybrid model, their preference would be to move towards using masks and re-implementing mitigation measures rather than going to a hybrid. And I tend to agree with that. They agreed with the no remote-only option, except in the circumstances that I mentioned in the initial presentation. IEP, injury, health issue that's documented by a physician, isolation or quarantine, but not for the traditional regular sick day. They did say if we do get to the point where we need to return to a hybrid model, one thing they would like to see looked at is the maroon and gray schedule. And we talked about this at leadership this morning. Some of the concerns were around the alternating Fridays. How do you address the situation where you have a snow day or a quarantine day that has students not being in the school physically for 4 or 5 days? Right now, there's not a good answer for that, but that's one thing that they were talking about. The other piece was, they said if we do need to get to a point where it's hybrid, we would rather see the younger students, to the extent possible, and the students with the highest special needs be in school every day. So I thought it was a real good opening session with this group. I look forward to our next meeting next week. Some of the things that I shared are similar to what you heard from the other feedback that we received. Really good stuff and really informative, and you heard some of that's reflected in the draft plan that we've done.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have some feedback from some parents who've reached out directly to me. So one of them is a physician and said that, okay, just out of disclosure, I am trained as a virologist. I've studied viruses for decades. And I'm part of the medical community that understands this pandemic. So this doctor, and he wanted not to be identified, he's a pediatrician, and he said two things. One thing that there must have to be mandatory for kids who are not vaccinated and for people who are not vaccinated. And so anybody below 12 needs to wear a mask, because none of us in the medical community knows what can happen next. I mean, even I don't know. We're scratching our heads. And so one of the physicians said this. He also commented that about the psychological impact of mask. And I am suggesting, though, if there are some psychological impacts, there are clear masks available now. You can get clear masks. You don't have to have your mouth covered, so the smile, everything can be seen, which is very important. And another parent said, and this parent has a child who's disabled, has speech disability, and she said that she's ready to put a mask on her kid as long as we are safe. Another parent reached out to me and they wanted full house option, the 5 days a week, because they don't have good internet. They cannot afford good internet. So the hybrid model or the non-school option is devastating, and they are not well-to-do, and they have to go to work. Both parents have to go to work. So the kids cannot sit outside Dunkin' Donuts or anywhere else outside school in the winter and do learning. So I got a strong sense that if we care about our community and people in this community who cannot afford high-speed internet, I think 5 days an option. It's not an option to me. It's almost necessary.
Not a choice.
So necessary. So that said, I think, in my opinion, if people are having trouble getting masks, or having trouble with masks, I should say, there can be hybrid options with masks too. For example, when a person is seated in one spot and is further apart from people, they can remove the mask, right? So in a classroom where the child is seated, when you remove the mask, you can remove the mask. But then, when you stand up going to the bathroom, because you have to remember
Passing in the hallway.
passing in the hallway. I have to say this, and I've told many people, this is not a demon, it's a virus. And we know how viruses are transmitted,
Especially in that younger population where, as a kindergartner, you may not necessarily be like, oh, I'm going to sneeze, cover my face. Oh, we're walking next to each other. I just sneezed all over you.
So they are in school, there are times that are crowded, there are times that are not crowded. So I think having, let's say, a full-blown, all the time mask is good, actually. That's what I would say would be the best situation. But I have heard other staff members here saying that, we can't teach properly, we can't do our job properly, and these kids are also suffering, right? So to me, I think we have the ability. It's never all or nothing, it's never like that, right? There are options that are available, but I would say kids should come to school masked, but there are places and areas that they can remove their masks and put them back on, right? Let's be logical about this rather than, just mandating everything. And of course, this always depends on what the CDC tells us and Department of Education, because I'm telling all the parents right now, we do not make these decisions. Sometimes the decision comes from CDC or the Department of Education, and we have no choice, right? As board members, we have no choice. We have, and as a superintendent, you don't have a choice if something comes down and says, this has to happen. But I'll tell you one thing, the more masking we do, the less likely we're gonna go to that hybrid option. So the choice is ours. If we wanna come back with no masks and just around the corridors where people are coughing on each other, sure, we can do that, but be prepared for a hybrid option. Be prepared for schools to shut down, right? And as you all know, as parents who are listening and administrators and stuff, a lot of infections that go around, start in schools, right? Because those little kids, they don't know, they spread it around and then it spreads through the community, right? So I think we have to weigh this option seriously. I hate it. Like Jackson Labs has instituted masks now. It's very difficult to do my job with a mask. Well, some places I have to wear a mask. But, it's hard to talk to people when you have a mask on, right? And if you're trying to communicate, especially with a person like me who has an accent and, speaks weirdly, people don't understand me. And then things go wrong. So I think we have to be very careful when making this decision.
And I heard from several parents as well, and it was kind of similar to Carol Ann's results. It was kind of split. It was a very strong feeling one way or the other. Now, I will say that I do really, I wondered this last year, and I wasn't on the board yet when this decision was made last year, but we had the option of, we had social distancing with masks, and at that point in time when that decision was made, we weren't having to do both. That came later in the year. Then it became, no matter how far away you are, you're wearing a mask. So I wondered when that happened why the Department of Education had said, let's do both. So I do feel like having, like what you mentioned, like when you're in a community area, when you're sitting at your desk, when we're sitting here, we can be a certain distance away from each other. But when we get up to get our lunch boxes to head down to the cafeteria, or when it's harder to maintain that distance, and those I feel like would be good opportune times to have the masks on, so that when you're learning in the classroom with your teacher, when you're outside at recess playing with your friends, you can have the mask off, kind of get a little bit of both. But when you're in the hallway, standing at your locker and we're right next to each other, we have a mask on so that we're not spreading. Because I mean, a lot of us here are parents, and there are parents watching, and we do know that the beginning of the school year, it's like, with the exception of last year, because of all of the social distancing and masking, it's usually from the day school starts until about midway through December. My kids have a cold of some type for that whole several months, and that didn't happen last year because we had those things in place. So if we come back, and it may not be that we have a slew of kids with COVID and have to go to hybrid, but we very well could have a slew of kids with colds and still have to go to hybrid, because all of them have to be on quarantine until they get a negative test or until their symptoms are gone. So I'm referring to the questionnaire. Like if my child on that questionnaire has new or worsening cough, difficulty breathing, those types of things, if they have those symptoms, which often go along hand in hand with the common cold as well, unless they're getting tested, if they have those symptoms, I'm likely going to keep them home, which could lead to a whole slew of kids being home because a whole bunch of kids have a cold. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It does.
It does. So the thing about having masks as optional, this will create division and bullying, right? Because my kid will show up with a mask. I know he's smart. He wants to put a mask on, and another kid will be like, "Oh, you're wearing a mask. What are you afraid or something?" And they'll start putting masks, it will create a division. We are already a divided country, we're a divided society. The last thing we want to do is have kids fight amongst themselves. And this will be even more work for teachers, trying to say who can wear a mask and who can. So if we make a decision, we have to keep that in mind.
Munir, honestly, I've gone back and forth thinking about how to make this work. Mask, no mask. I've thought about the bullying pieces. But honestly, I haven't thought about the piece of, okay, masks in the hallways. You sit down at your desk, you're socially distanced properly, you can take your mask off.
Option.
That optional, yes. I haven't thought about that option. And that's a great option. That's a great thought.
I haven't thought of it either, and I think it's a great thought, but I just want to say, if that's something we're going to consider, can we call it something other than the hybrid mask model?
Yeah.
We'll call it the Munir model.
I think if we're talking about masks, and having them be mandatory in certain contexts, circumstances, like on the buses, in the hallways, but not outside, not outdoors in the playground, not in the classroom. If the children are seated, they have the option to take it off. But I think we need to bring in the topic of pool testing as we talk about this, because that is something that can give us more information about what the level of COVID is within our school community, and whether we need to become more stringent or double down on some of the mask requirements, or whether we can continue to allow certain circumstances for it to be optional. So we haven't really gotten into the pool testing part of this conversation yet, and maybe it's a good idea to bring that in now. I know that Maine CDC has talked about it, right? And Dan, you can probably,
Yep, and I can talk a little bit about what Dr. Shaw and his staff presented, but
Yeah.
just to go back to one piece, and this is one piece that would be in this plan, I think we do have to, and we have to be cognizant of any bullying or teasing or division. I think that's a point that's well made. But I also think that we should be in a point where if we have students or staff who want to wear a mask, we should honor and respect it.
Yes.
And it will make more work on all of us, but if somebody chooses to do that, there should not be ridicule. There should be respect for, if you want to make that choice, that's great.
Well, and I
Again,
know-
in practice, that can still happen, I agree, Munir, but
And I know at the year-end celebrations, like I know a lot of us attended those, there were some kids, some students who outside were willing to be unmasked, and then there were some students who chose to continue to wear their mask. And I wasn't really close enough to that to see if there was anything happening behind the scenes in regards to that. But it appeared as though they were respectful of each other, at least in those situations.
Can we go to the pool testing?
So, in Dr. Shaw's presentation, that is, the pool testing or the pod testing is something they're certainly supporting, endorsing, and encouraging. From my understanding, it is not an invasive test. And some of you may have seen the report on one of the local television news stations of one of the summer programs up in Piscataquis County that did it. It was a little swab in the nose where a student was able to do it themselves, and they put it into the tube. So I think the invasiveness is not the issue. I do know, just anecdotally, there have been a number of parents who've reached out to me and said they would not be interested and wanted to know if it was something that would be mandated or optional. I believe there has to be consent. The other piece that I want to put up, to my understanding of it, and I look at our different grade spans here, we had this conversation around our table. If you were at Ellsworth High School, if you were to test the group of students in period 1 English, when those students go off to period 2 for science, and period 3 for math, and so forth, they're not going with the same group the rest of the day. So I question the efficacy of that. You can still get that first group and find out if there's a positive test, but where does that positive test go the rest of the day? So there could be a logistical challenge there. It's less prevalent at the middle school, where you have the two groups and they stay together, but they're still changing classes. In a self-contained classroom, like we have predominantly at K through 4, and you could make the same argument at HCTC, because those students are in programs. You're testing those students at whatever time of day you do it once a week. If you get a positive test, you take the next step and do the rapid test and determine where that is. Those students are pretty much self-contained for the entire day. So one of the pieces I'd like to know more about is how that would work logistically. Conceptually, I understand it. It can help you identify if there is a case, where there is a case, you can quarantine, you can keep those cases from spreading, and that can be an effective, I don't want to say a replacement for masking or spacing, but it can certainly be an effective tool.
So there are randomized models, mathematical models, where you have somebody move around the area and considering that the high school is one population,
Right.
there are models that you could pick, randomized models that you can actually find. We can speak about this offline. That you could test a certain percent and still get the ability to understand the COVIDness. Ecologists, I'll give you an example. They throw a quadrant in the field, and then they count the number of snails, right?
Mhm.
And then they make population
Estimates.
about it. It's based on the same principle. I've seen models like that, and we can talk about it offline. But I think, and also you have one additional fact that in the high school, some people are already vaccinated, even the students are vaccinated, right? And that, as we know, mitigates some the viral load. So it might be that the pool testing is a good idea anyway to actually make sure that we, for the high school, just to understand. But for the middle school and the lower school, I think we will need, it's an option, and I think we need to have parents in every class, because it's pool, the whole idea of pool testing is you're not testing anybody. So let's say there's a class of 20 kids. If one or two kids say they're going to go ahead and do the test, if they turn out positive, then we can talk about that particular classroom. That's why it's called pool testing, not mandatory testing.
So
for
basically,
everybody.
you just need a couple of kids per class to
There is a
agree.
number that CDC gives you per classroom, per.
I believe it's 30% of kids have to participate in a school.
Well,
Is that-
and one thing I'll say, there's a qualifier. I forwarded this to you folks this afternoon. It was a
Yeah.
document that came out earlier. There's a frequently asked questions document that went along with Dr. Shaw's presentation.
Right.
I didn't get to see it until about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Couple of things in there. One, there are a lot of questions on the actual testing program that might be helpful to this conversation. Another one, and I think this has changed, Kelly, I saw this for the first time today, that 30% number was supposed to be a piece where if you had 30% of your student body participating, that spacing in the lunchroom would no longer be an issue. Since the requirements are no longer requirements, those are no longer banded together, which I didn't realize until I saw it this afternoon.
So what do you
I
mean
have,
by
I have to
that?
read it again.
Okay.
I don't think there's that 30% requirement anymore to reduce your spacing.
Okay.
That was what and again, that was what I understood it to mean. But again, that document came out today. I haven't had a chance, you guys all have access to it in a link in that email.
Yeah.
So I think that would help this conversation on where we might go with the pool testing.
So I do have a,
Yeah, I got a chance
Sorry,
to
go
go
ahead, Bob.
through the document a little bit, and I got it up in front of me right now. So, there, if we want to do pool testing, we can submit an application to the state, and they will provide the materials and the resources to do it. It's not mandatory, okay?
Right.
It's voluntary. It's an effective, strategy in areas with high transmission, high prevalence of COVID-19. It's also an effective strategy in areas with low transmission rates. So you're identifying whether it's the virus is making an appearance and starting to spread within your community. And sometimes you know that because people are getting sick, all around you. But sometimes you don't know. You're a low transmission area, population and you don't know, you think, okay, it's low, but you've got some breakthrough cases with no symptoms, and when that starts to happen, the pool testing will start to pick that up. And then we can react and adjust what we're doing accordingly.
One additional thing is the pool testing will help you identify if it's COVID or not. And I have to tell, everybody's talking about COVID. Other diseases are still around. You know, the cold is still around, everything
flu.
else is, the flu is around. So with pool testing, we'll identify, okay, I kept my kid home, but they've been pool tested, you know. So it's not COVID, so you're not taking those extra steps to do things, and, you know, and you're just, it's a cold, it's different.
And just to be clear, this is something that parents would have to opt
Yes,
into.
yes.
This is not something where we test all kids.
No.
Parents
this-
would opt
You
in.
don't need to, you don't need to.
Yeah.
Is this something that the staff would also, be like, so who would be collecting the tests, and could the staff opt into it
Well,
as well?
and that's some of the pieces that it would fall in part on your school nurse staff. In some cases, and again, I'm trying to think back to the video I saw on the news. I don't know if it was a school nurse who was supervising it or one of the classroom teachers. You know, one of my concerns on having the classroom teachers or ed techs do it, you know, ed techs come at a premium. Classroom teachers have plenty on their plates.
Yeah.
School nurses, there are COVID funds available if we can find someone. And one of the things that's on the list is, in addition to hiring 2 nurses, keep your fingers crossed, that might be done this week.
Yeah.
Hiring additional nursing support, and I have someone in mind that
Well,
may
that-
be interested in being part of that. Getting additional support. The other thing that has come out from the Department of Ed is they would provide support. Now, my understanding initially was that was administrative or paperwork support, but I heard in one of these briefings that might include staffing. So I'd like to pursue that.
Well, because I was just wondering, like, if it's a state teacher, when would they have time to do it? And if it's a school nurse, I think our school nurses were, like, crazy busy last year and wouldn't have had the extra time to go to the classroom. So, like, I would want to make sure before we moved forward with any sort of pool testing that we had, one, we had staff that was willing to do it, and 2, that we had the bandwidth to be able to do it. Because if we say we're going to have our school nurses do it, and then someone comes on with COVID-like symptoms and has to go to the nurse's office, but the nurse is out pooled, you know, so then there's a logistical
Yeah.
scariness to
Somebody
that.
needs to be-
And that's one of the reasons that the language that's in the draft plan is we would continue to seek resources on how to implement a screening testing model.
In the frequently asked questions in this document, the Department of Health and Human Services says that in most cases, they expect that pool testing can be conducted with existing staff, which could include, but is not limited to, nurses. So other people can be trained in collecting these samples, and it doesn't have to be exclusively the nurses. But it sounds like it's not a very cumbersome process.
Yeah.
And
I would just-
the tests themselves are self-administered, and then they just have to be collected.
Right.
Right.
And my concern would be, like I heard April say that a lot of her staff was feeling reluctant about that.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's-
I would want to I wouldn't want to put our staff in an uncomfortable position if they're not comfortable
Well, I think-
with that too, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not surprising to hear that there's reluctance with something that is, a brand-new concept that people haven't really had a chance to learn about. I think as we educate ourselves and educate our school community and our community at large, people may come to feel much more comfortable with this.
I think so too.
Kids love picking their nose. You're asking a kid to pick his nose, he would do it.
Right,
They-
right, with
they
a
do that-
Q-tip, they could even be like, look at what's on here.
Exactly. They'll do that for fun.
But, to piggyback, it's not going to be as funny as what you said, but to piggyback on what Paul said, for years, one of the things that school nurses have been able to train other staff members to do is support administering medication. So it would be a matter of providing the proper training, and we've had some ed techs in past years who, with the proper training, have supported us in that type of endeavor. So,
Well, and when I was a kid, we used to, I don't know if they still do this, but when I was a kid, the school nurse would come around and bring the fluoride once a month or whatever, and everyone that was signed up to have fluoride would take a break from the class, they'd chew up their fluoride tablet and swish it around, and that was something that they did on a regular basis, and it was the same way with like vice checks. Those were on a regular basis. It was something that was just done in the classroom, I would just want to make sure that we have the staff able to support that with our staff already doing so much. And I would want to be sure that whomever is doing it is comfortable.
I think with the information that is out there, the FAQs that came here, bringing on board two new school nurses, and hopefully getting some resource support from another person, we can move forward with this. And particularly if it's optional and we don't need to have a large number of participants in any one classroom, it could be an effective mitigation tool.
Now, once we've done an application, are we tied to it, or is it like we can do an application so that we are
I believe you
in
can
there
opt
and
in,
then
I
we can
believe you
change
can
our
opt
mind?
out.
Okay.
Any other questions, conversation?
I would just want to just add one little conclusion that from this document. Screening has been demonstrated to catch cases early and reduce transmission in the classroom and in the community. With this added layer of protection, schools may reduce physical distancing requirements, including when students and staff are eating. So, you know, there's benefits to doing this. We can get to some of our other goals if we are able to do pooled testing.
Right.
So I think, you know, we'll obviously study this further and discuss it further.
Absolutely. And the last thing we want is to have to go back to remote learning.
Right.
I would echo
One
that.
second.
The other piece, I guess I would.
So before we talk about, so if we're going to talk about pool testing, we really can't make a decision to go forward with something if we know what happens after we pool test. If we pool test and we have a positive result, what happens next? Because this isn't just about doing the test. This is about an entire process. And right now, we're just talking about one piece. We've only talked about, you know, this first part. But we need a lot more information here. So if we get a classroom that tests positive, what happens to that classroom? What happens to those kids?
And those are the, you're right, Abby, those are the questions that have to be answered. My understanding is, from my knowledge of it, if you get a positive test from a particular classroom, there's a rapid test done on all of the other students in the classroom. One of the questions I would have, if in a classroom of 20, to take your example, Munir, we have 3 families who have opted in for their children to do the test, and one of them happens to be positive. Does there have to be consent to do the rapid test on the remaining 17 students who didn't
Yeah.
consent? I think those are some of the
Right.
questions that have to be answered.
Yeah.
So my understanding, Abby, would be there could potentially be a quarantine of the remainder of those students
Yeah.
pending their test results.
Right, but if you have 3 kids who test positive, odds are, there's 3 positives of those 3 that are allowed to pod test, then odds are there's more.
So another piece, and again, just speculating, another piece would be if you had 1, 2, or 3.
Right, so speculation. Okay, so this is the thing.
You there, Abby?
I cannot hear you. Now I can hear you. Okay, so real quickly, this is the thing. If we test in classroom that's above 12, and we have somebody that tests positive, we're gonna make a bunch of kids quarantine who are possibly already vaccinated and have those kids miss 2 weeks of school who are vaccinated. I just don't see this as being a really good idea. You guys want to go ahead with an application, but we have a lot of questions. It seems like we're getting part of the picture, and once again, if we apply, how tied are we to this? This isn't clear cut.
I think one thing, Abby, and again, the standard operating procedure on having a positive case is being reworked, but as we ended last year, if we had a positive case in a part of the school where people had the ability to be vaccinated, if somebody was fully vaccinated who was a close contact, unless they had symptoms, they were not required to quarantine. So I believe that would continue forward in a pool testing environment. But Abby, I agree. I think there are things that need to be fleshed out before we have the board vote to move forward with this, to make sure you have all the information.
So will we be asking parents of vaccinated children to be including that vaccination record with their other vaccination records? Or is that a place that we can't go? Is
Well,
that?
I'm glad you asked that question, because a couple of things. One is, bless you.
Bless you.
One of the things we are now being required to do, and I'm waiting to learn a little bit more on how we're going to do, is we need to provide data to Department of Health and Human Services on the percentage of our student body and percentage of staff members who are fully vaccinated. We'll figure out what the process is. In some cases, people do not want to divulge that information. They have the right not to divulge that information. But we're required to do that, and we'll figure that out. But here's where I would go with that piece. If we have a situation where we have a positive test, and we identify close contacts, people are required to quarantine. Okay, the only way that they don't quarantine is if they don't have symptoms and they're fully vaccinated. My position is that if we're in that case, let's just say that we're all close contacts, you need to quarantine. If you do not want to quarantine, you can confidentially provide me with a copy of your card to show me that you're fully vaccinated, student or staff. I don't believe that's been tested in a court of law, but I think that's a valid requirement to put in place. Otherwise, if you're allowing someone who's not fully vaccinated to stay and they're a close contact, are you contributing to a potential spread? So that may have gone a little further than just your question, but
Yeah.
in general,
No, but
no.
it makes sense, because otherwise and I'm not saying that most people are not, but as we learned last year, sometimes people take a vacation and they say, it's fine to not wait the 2 weeks before you go back to school. You know what I mean? Like when that was one of the, so we're relying on people to be honest. And while I would love to believe that everyone would be honest about that,
Well,
that's not always
that also comes up with the symptom checklist that
Yeah.
we tell people to do. You're relying on the honor system with that. Unless a student or staff member comes and our school nurse says, you've got symptoms, you're going home.
Right.
But I guess to answer your question, no, I don't think we have the right to ask people their specific vaccination status and require it of them unless we're in a case where they're a close contact.
You have to remember, last year, towards the end of last year, the model that Ellsworth school system used kept the kids, kept the staff very safer than the community, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's data. You can't dispute that
Yeah.
data. So I think, I totally understand. I mean, I hate this thing, okay? But the thing is, we have to understand that this virus is mutating. We are in a situation where we could avoid, pool testing is one of them, masking is another. We could avoid complete shutdown. What I don't want for these children is to not have the good education that we provide them in school. I think I heard every administrator here tell me that their staff want 5 days a week, right? If I misheard that, correct me.
And every
Right?
parent.
And every parent and every business owner out there, right? They want 5 days a week. So I think we just have to swallow this
Find a way to make it 5 days a week.
and keep that 5 days a week. And then if this pandemic disappears, we'll go back to the fun stuff, right?
So a couple of questions, and I completely agree. The mitigation requirements that were in place last year contributed greatly to the virtually no community spread within the schools, no question about it. And that's certainly something that has to be considered moving forward. So as a board, from this discussion, obviously, more specific information on what a pool testing program would look like. And I think it would be nice to have someone be part of that conversation who might have some experience in virology.
You know somebody?
I'm wondering about that. If
We
it would
were
be
all
okay to
like-
have a conversation with you as we bring nurses on board.
Yep.
The other piece, I think, is along with the masking, and, to hear you bring up the concept you brought up tonight, much like Kelly said, that wasn't something I thought of, but it harkens me back to pre-July 1 in the district office. We all masked in the common places, but when we went into our own office, we were able to take it off, so something like that could work. But I think moving forward between now and next Thursday, when you can make a decision, unless a mandate comes down, that says you have to mask, we'll be asking for a vote from you on a plan. So, you can look at the overall spectrum. The CDC recommendations, nationally and in the state of Maine, are that indoor gathering spaces like schools, everybody is recommended to mask up regardless of vaccination status. That's one option that's there. Another option is fully optional and support people who choose to wear it. There are some that are in between. One of them I think is intriguing, is the one that you brought up tonight. Another one is one that, in talking with our school health advisor, and this is not in the form of a recommendation, but a thought, because there are other thoughts. One of them, and I think we've seen this in information that came from a parent who wrote an email into all of us, start the school year with masks, and depending upon what metrics you want to follow, transmission rates, case numbers, hospitalizations, et cetera, start to reduce the number of masks. And at some point in time, vaccinations are likely to be available to students ages 11 and down. That's one option. Another option that I've heard is start the year with masks being optional. If things start to get worse based upon metrics, ramp up. So I think between now and next Thursday, what information would the board like to see so we can move forward with that? When you're talking
Okay, sorry, I don't think you can see me when I'm over here behind you, but I have some questions and some things, and I'm not getting much of an opportunity to ask any questions here. First of all, we need to know, once we have a positive COVID test, if we do decide to pull, what kind of financial burden are we putting on our parents at home? Are they going to have to get tested? Is the CDC, is CARES Act funds going to then cover them going to get tested? We also need to know a lot more clarification here, because the last thing I read about pool testing, the pool testing from the state that we were going to have funds available for, was going to require every single person in that class, regardless of vaccination status, to then quarantine. We need to be very sure that what we're saying is true, and that those people could potentially come back if they're vaccinated and not have to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Good questions, Abby.
What are your thoughts, Abby, on the masking? We didn't hear you on that.
So, well, thank you. If we require 12 and up and staff to mask, all we're doing is telling people who got the vaccine that you did it for nothing. We are telling them that there was going to be a benefit to this, one other than staying alive and staying healthy. But if we suddenly make everybody mask up without being a COVID hotspot, all we're doing is discouraging anybody else who might be getting the vaccine to say, why bother? Why bother? If we're talking about under 12, I worry on a couple different levels. One, it has been an extraordinarily hot summer. It was a very hot June, and I don't think we're going to have a very cool September, especially the first couple of weeks. I'm extremely concerned about coming back the first couple of weeks and having kids having the same issues that we had in the beginning of June with the heat and the masks. I really think that we need to watch the numbers. We need to see where our local hospitals are in capacity with hospitalized COVID cases. I believe we have to also find out how many of those cases are pediatric. I think that to a very large extent, the element of protection has to come on families. The school can only do too much. I feel like we overstepped last year and we impeded on kids' education. I think this is a decision that we need to revisit every 2 weeks. I think we need to put on our agenda to vote on this at every regular meeting and at every workshop, because it is a fluid situation. It is changing all the time. While our numbers have stayed very low through this tourist season and with kids being in day camp and in daycares without masks and without social distancing, we still have to accept the fact that yes, it can change. And we might be looking at something entirely different tomorrow. I think the staff was spot on when they said that we need to make being in-person learning 5 days a week the top priority. And if we have to choose between masks and in-person learning, well, you know what, we're gonna choose in-person learning. But are we at the point right now where our local numbers really say that masking 12 and under is necessary? You know, I think in 2 weeks we'll, look at these numbers again and make that decision, but at the moment, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing the numbers that support that. It could change, but if I had to vote today, no, I would not be voting for masks, but I would be voting that we re-vote every single meeting. I think that maybe we would be better off taking the situation as it comes, where if we have a positive case, we ask that class and those people who are, those classrooms that had exposure to mask up for 2 weeks at a time. And I think kids need to know that there is an end to this. I think bringing them back under as normal circumstances as possible, getting those kids through the front door that first day is paramount. I think they might feel a lot comfortable knowing that we're going back without masks, even though we might have to mask up at some point. Coming in unmasked will get more kids to cross that line, to come in, to participate in the learning process. But I don't think we should go back, whether we do a quote-unquote hybrid mask like you had suggested, Manir, or we do something else. What I don't think we should do is do an all-mask situation unless we were to have a sudden surge in our numbers locally. I don't think we should do that, but that's just me.
Yeah, can I respond? So Abby, I think I understand where you're coming from. Your model then becomes reactive, right? So when the Delta variant came out, it started in India, I believe. They didn't know until it was too late, until the bodies started piling up. The one thing we cannot do is be reactive, right? We have to be proactive about, nobody can tell you, nobody should be able to tell you. Like this virus, we don't know what's going to turn out next, right? You were saying that, well, we should start off like that, and then if we get if we see an increase in the community, we can suddenly mandate masking. But it might be too late sometime, and now we have an issue. Nobody knew that last year that this Delta variant is 1,000 times more infectious, right? We don't know what this virus is going to do. And I would love to go back to no masking, nothing, doing what we did. But until we have this virus under control, at least as a society, I think there needs to be precaution. I do not want to see kids. What if it turns out to be that it becomes more pediatric?
And hasn't it, I might be wrong on this because I might have seen a study and then something may have changed because as we know it changes really fast.
every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But hasn't it been said that the Delta variant is potentially not worse for children than adults, but worse for children than COVID-19?
It's
That it's-
COVID-19 Delta variant.
Yes, but
yeah.
that the original COVID, that this particular variant
I think I
is
saw that
worse symptoms in kids
Yeah.
than the original mutation was.
See, it also, I'll tell you, there's studies, they've done post-mortem studies. They've seen COVID bind to brain, cells of the brain. They've seen COVID bind to the heart. One thing that COVID does that I am watching very closely, it removes certain types of T cells, known as interferon gamma T cells. Those are the ones that keep you alive. if you know, there's a disease called HIV, AIDS, that removes T cells. This one does it, but it's not doing it efficiently right now. Now, what if we turn that corner? Now we have an airborne. And I'm not trying to give scary stories here. I mean, these are speculations. I don't even know that, right? But I've seen the data showing that the T cells disappear. So by being reactive is okay, and we can do these like weekly voting or whatever. But let's be proactive and sensible about it, and in terms of like no masks or plastic bags on the head coming in, right? We're not gonna overreact with these kids. Because I understand fully what you're saying, Abby, right? Go on.
So, while I agree that, yes, we don't want mild climate.
You're frozen, Abby, just so you know.
It's the video.
I know I have to do that a lot for my work meetings. Sometimes I have to keep the video off if it's raining.
Yeah.
Rise in these numbers or it would hit here. Since the start or anything really hit counties in our lower states, the CDC, and they're now, let me tell you, no one, a crazy town right here. They're no one's vaccinated where the vaccine handed out that much, and yeah, Florida is going crazy with cases, but Maine isn't that. Maine has got such a high vaccine rate. Ellsworth is at 70%, MDI is at 9%, our surrounding towns are also around 70%. And by making masks optional, people who are really concerned that their kid is going to go to school and get this Delta variant, by all means, you can mask up. Nobody is discouraging you. Nobody. But at the same time, you know, if I do feel like if you are very concerned about getting this variant, then you're going to have everybody else in your home vaccinated. And that you aren't going to be bringing that home to your children, because the fact is we are seeing the transmission not really from schools, but from family members bringing it home. So I do feel like we would have a chance to get in front of it, but that is also largely because of our area has been, we have been so on top of it and so careful that we've never once, even without the vaccine, we've not become a COVID hotspot. And I think until those numbers really start rising, we do have some leeway. I do think that maybe we can get through the first 2 weeks of school with masks optional. But that's just, as I said, I'm not disagreeing with any of your science. Your science is spot on. I just think that yes, we would have a little bit of time to do something about it before, as you said, you know, we'd have bodies pile up. And, you know, this is coming from somebody who has had family loss due to COVID, you know, and I'm not looking to lose anybody else. So I don't say this lightly, but I think we could have that chance. But as I said, I'm one person with one opinion, so I respect everybody who doesn't have that exact opinion.
So not to debate the effectiveness of what a mask is for, but hasn't it been said all along by the CDC that I wear my mask to protect you, not I wear my mask to protect myself? Like I wear my mask to keep from spreading it if I have it. So it is both? Okay. I was just thinking like if I'm concerned and I don't want my kids to contract COVID, I'm also having them wear a mask so that they're not giving COVID to other people. Because even if they're wearing their mask, if they're exposed to someone who has COVID, they could still get it even if they're wearing their mask. I know that there's been different studies about like how long they've been in, how long you're in a room together and how long you are with one person masked and one person not, and there's all kinds of, but
If you're masked, the chances of droplet infection from somebody who coughs or sneezes getting to your throat and nose is very, very small. So
See,
it
and that's
protects
good.
you
And-
and protect others.
Awesome. I do think, Dan, it would be important to have multiple options.
And that's, I think this discussion is great. And Abby, thank you. Is she still there?
She's there.
I think so. She should shut her video off.
Okay. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts, Abby, and Munir, the same.
I'm here.
Okay, good. So just a couple of other pieces, in hearing this conversation, in talking with our school health advisor, there are still questions on it. Is this going to become prevalent in our community? I mean, obviously, we don't know that right now. But a couple of the things I think it's important to bear in mind for your discussion as a board is, if we're looking at the goal of maximizing the opportunity for 5-day in-person instruction, okay, we're already talking about getting more information on pool testing, but what are the things that we can do to prevent the virus from getting into our school and transmitting and preventing the quarantine of lots of kids? One of the conversations we had around the table today was kids and families concerned that if I test positive, what am I going to miss in school? If we have 100 kids quarantined, what are they going to miss in school? Are they going to miss opening day ceremonies? Are they going to miss the playoff game or what have you? The other piece that I got from the school health advisor is, and you addressed this earlier, Munir, divisiveness is not going to help anybody. Being divisive about this issue, and this is an issue that is potentially divisive. It's to try to come up with a plan that the community can get behind. So if you're, well, but I think if it's well thought out, so we've got differing opinions here, which I think is healthy. I mean, this is a great conversation. It really is. One of the pieces, if this is kind of the opposite of what Abby was saying, and Abby, I'm not arguing with what you're saying, just passing it out as something was shared with me. If you were to go in with a plan where you started with all masks and pull back as conditions get better, remove masks from cohorts as the disease diminishes. So what I was told was you can make predictions based on potentially 3-week intervals. So if you look at, and that maybe that's something to do with an incubation period plus some time, without an increase in cases in schools, or the community transmission rate, or hospitalizations of pediatrics, or numbers of students showing up in hospitals. Again, the younger students are showing up and more prevalent now because they're unvaccinated. Maybe you can use some of those metrics if you were to start the school year and 2 to 3 weeks in say, based upon conditions now, let's remove the masking requirement and make it optional for this group. Now, that might be something well thought out the community could get behind. It might create more divisiveness. And I think it's to come up with something that the community can support, that you can support as a board, that allows us to start school, focus on the social, emotional, and physical health of kids and staff members and visitors, that allows us to keep schools open in person 5 days a week. So I've heard that goal around this room over and over tonight.
Dan, I have a question. I don't think we've talked about this. So say there is a child who is positive for COVID.
Yep.
And kids need to quarantine.
Mhm.
Do kids who are vaccinated need to quarantine? Do we know that piece
Yeah,
yet?
well, Under the current standard operating procedure, the answer is no.
Okay.
Unless they're showing, unless they're showing symptoms. Yeah, I'm having trouble with that one. It's a tongue twister for me. Unless they're showing symptoms.
Okay.
I presume, I saw this today or heard this today, that SOP is being revised and they want to have it out before school starts. I presume that will be the same answer when that comes out.
Okay.
And Dan, I know you asked before what we would like to see in order to make our decision. I do think, like I mentioned, I think having more than one plan that, maybe we can all come to an agreement on. But also I think information comparing those plans from medical professionals, like I know Munir has a lot of information, but like we have our medical contact through Maine Coast Pediatrics. Just, okay, so our common, here are our 3 that we'd like to compare. This is just an example, I'm not saying this is it, but optional masks for everybody in every situation, and masks in high traffic areas and when stationary can be removed. Like, so that we have something to compare, maybe even prior to the meeting, like just we don't have to discuss it, but just the information be distributed so that we can come in prepared next week and have the options in front of us with the supporting information, because Munir is very right. It's science, and it's changing every day. But if we can have the most up to date and make the most informed decision, and then if it has to change in a month, it has to change in a month. But then we're making the most informed decision, and we're doing what's going to be the best benefit. And I would really love to hear from, I think it's Dr. McGregor, who's our doctor, right? I would really love to hear from him about the mental health aspect. In addition to like so I want to know the science aspect, and I would love to know the mental health aspect so that we can look at both of those and go from there, because I think we obviously have to be ready and willing to think on our feet and reevaluate and change if necessary, because we don't want to be reactive, but we want to be on top of what's happening so that we can keep our kids safe, so that we don't end up on a fully remote or even a hybrid. We want to keep all of our kids in school as much as we can.
Yep.
So those are what I'd like to see.
Are we going to vote on this next time?
Next time.
Next Thursday.
That is,
So we'll get all that information before next
Yes.
Thursday?
well, I'm going to be in contact with you.
Yeah.
I've already I have spoken with Dr. McGregor. That's our school health advisor,
Yeah.
and I'm referring
Yes.
to some of the information he gave me.
Yes.
Including that thought about start with masks, 3 weeks, that type of thing. The mental health piece I can get.
Yes.
The other piece, and I'm thinking of, I'm not going to call it the hybrid mask plan. I'm going to call it, it's your plan.
The
okay?
Munir model.
I know one of the things, and I know in talking with our school bus drivers, right now, I mean, it's not optional on buses, it's mandated. I mean, that has to happen. They're driving buses, some of our newer buses have higher seats. Their concern is, how do we monitor this? They do the best they can. But if I think of the model that you put on the table for consideration, I'm thinking about how that's going to be managed in the schools. I mean, these folks and their staff members spent a lot of time last year with the mask mandate. If you had a nickel for every time you reminded a student or a staff member to fix their masks, you could retire probably, right? You're not going to answer that?
On Luke alone, maybe?
But, I look at that type of a model where, and I think I kind of like it just conceptually. You're in the main concourse at Ellsworth High School, you mask up. You get to your classroom, you sit down, you have the option of taking it off. But I'm also thinking about managing that in the schools. I think that's got to be a consideration too.
I think that's the same thing you have to consider when it's mandatory for everybody or optional for some. Like how that would, if you make it optional for kids who are vaccinated, how are staff members going to put, like, if I'm a parent and I send my kid in a mask in the morning, how I'm not going to expect a teacher or a staff member to be like, your mom sent you in a mask, you better put that on.
But I think that's a piece that I did talk to McGregor about. If you're making it optional, it's optional for everybody, because we're not going to be asking people for their vaccination status, there we go, unless we have a positive case and it's about quarantine. So how would you know? You won't.
Exactly.
So, okay.
All right, so we have 13 minutes left in this meeting,
Unless we extend it.
Right.
unless we extend it. Do we need further discussion, do you think? All right, so the questions that I have still on the table is what pool testing will look like, the financial burden regarding pool testing, if there's a positive test with pool testing, will everyone need to quarantine? The mental health aspect for kids from Dr. McGregor.
Is that the mental health aspect of masking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought
Yes.
that's what.
Yes, because I know we all know what we're seeing, but he also knows what they're seeing in the doctor's
Yeah.
offices.
Right.
Yeah. And Dr. McGregor's thoughts regarding optional masks for everyone, and then masks just in high traffic areas.
So the three options, so I've got them, would be
Yep.
everybody,
Optional masks
Everybody optional.
everyone optional, mask for everyone, or mask just in high traffic areas.
May I ask a clarifying question on the masks for everybody piece? Because I know one of the pieces that he tossed out in our conversation was starting with everybody, but looking at metrics and reducing
Yeah.
as you go. Do you want that to be part of the mask for
Yes.
everybody? Or just masks for everybody? Because I don't think any of us want to see masks for everybody forever,
Indefinitely.
indefinitely. That's
If we can taper it off, that would be awesome.
Good, all right, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, can do that.
We all good? Okay. So.
Great discussion.
Yes, very good discussion. So
Yes,
we have
and-
4 more items on our agenda.
I think most of the rest of these can be pretty, fairly brief.
I'm wondering if we should table the follow-up discussion from the board retreat, because I think that could be a long conversation. How do folks feel about that?
I think you're right.
I'm okay with that.
Everyone in agreement? Do you good with that?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
For anyone wondering, it was fabulous.
It was great. It was a great day, for sure. All right. So then let's move on to standing committee scheduling.
May I offer something that might be
Yes,
helpful?
absolutely.
I think the purpose for this was to talk about starting to determine schedules for regular meetings. I'm just going to toss this out. I know of the committees who are represented here tonight, Personnel is probably going to meet before the week's over. Finance is probably going to meet before the week is over. Facilities and Transportation, I'm going to be asking to meet before the next board meeting. Policy, you might be asked to meet before the next. Abby, are you still able to hear this?
Yes?
Okay, policy will hopefully be asked to meet before the next board meeting, as will curriculum. And I think that's all of them, right? Would it be worth having a conversation at those meetings about a tentative schedule for the year?
I think that's a good idea.
That was exactly what I was gonna ask. Absolutely.
Well, if you're asking, then my answer would be, I think that's a great idea.
All right, great. If everyone could come back to the next meeting
Yeah.
with a tentative schedule, that would be great.
I think we can do that.
All good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Check. All right. Preliminary discussion regarding school board size. This was yours, Abby.
It was just mine from when I was chair for that 1 month, but it was brought up. I can't even remember by who or what, but we had talked about, why aren't we a board of 7 the same way we're, city council is 7? And I think a lot of it has to do with committee assignments and time that the school board takes. We are volunteers, we are all people with regular jobs. This is something that is taking far more time than what we would if we had a board of 7. And I can say, from having a husband on city council, yes, I have to dedicate far more time to this than city council. And my husband's a very dedicated city councilman, so I don't say that lightly. But we have about half the entire city budget in our schools. We actually have far more employees in our school district than what the city has. And then on top of that, we oversee, all the students. I think it really does make sense to, first of all, have the representation of 7 different people within the community who have a variety of different points of view. And I think it really helps to keep the workload light. I wonder if we would have lost other board members if we would have had a different delegation of workload. And I think it's something that I'm very concerned about losing yet another board member because of the hours in which we commit to this. And to be an effective board member, you have to commit this many hours. I mean, here I am, I'm traveling and I'm taking time out to do this. And I have to. When you're a board of 5, you have to show up every day. You just do. Not that I'm saying I want to not show up, but at the same time, when I'm away for a family funeral, it would be nice to step away. There's no doubt. And I really feel like with the amount of responsibility that the school district shoulders, I think it makes perfect sense to have the same amount of board members as city council. But it's not about what I think, it's about what everybody thinks, so.
I agree with you, Abby, that I would love to have more people around the table. I think the more opinions and different thoughts that we have around the table, the better it is for our students and our staff. However, my concern is that prior to the last couple of years, it's been hard to even get 5 members to run for school board. So that's my biggest concern. I know we've had many people run for school board the last few years, but I wonder if it's because of what we've had going on in the schools regarding COVID and the difficult decisions that have been had to be made. So that's my wondering. And I wonder if we could get those numbers from the city as to how many people have run each year. I'm not sure. I'm
sure
assuming we
could.
can.
It would be on ballot record
Yeah.
of some kind, yeah. I think my concern in that, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna say this without it sounding like it could potentially sound. So there are nights that with 5 people, with 5 opinions, we have 4-hour-long meetings. And I wonder what that might look like if you add potentially 2 more people with potentially 2 more opinions. Like, would it end up being more sharing of the workload, or would it end up being more work because we're spending more time debating because there's more? And I understand, like I remember where this came from. We had some really amazing candidates. Every person who put their name in to replace Jen on the board was spectacular, and that's where that conversation came from. It was like we had more than one person that we thought could bring a new light and a new opinion and a new perspective. And I think that's where that conversation came out of. I'm afraid of that coming out as sounding like, well, I don't want to be here for 5 hours, because it's what I signed up for. If we're here for 5 hours, we are. But I'm not sure if there would be benefit or loss to having additional people. That's just a thought.
For what it's worth.
Respectfully, though, I think that's something that can be worked around. I think city council has 7 people. They don't have meetings as long as ours. Granted, they don't always have the same subject matter, but at the same time, it's also about time management of the meeting. People should not be speaking for more than, you get 5 minutes. And once again, being recognized by the chair. I think that it is more about, if you looked at how much time each person spent talking during the meeting, I think all reports have to be submitted to be read, but also a certain time of how long that, you should be at the podium talking about that, but let's face it, city council has 7 people, they don't go into 5-hour meetings, it's manageable.
Any other thoughts? Paul?
I'm just wondering, what's the mechanism for changing the number of members of a school board?
I think you'd have a policy consideration, and I would say there would be a city council charter consideration. So I know that there are some parts of the charter that do govern school board operations.
Right, and state statute as well, right?
It still has a charter. I've already asked that question when I was chair. Basically, we have to ask city council to amend the charter.
Okay.
That's what needs to happen.
Does anyone know how many, I mean, we're a larger school district. Does anyone know, like the percentage of school boards that are 5 versus 7?
Well, that would be interesting information to look at. I can tell you, where I was before I came here, it was an 18-member board.
Right.
But that was 5 communities.
In the state of Maine, under 5 people, and the majority have over 5 people.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And actually have over 5 people with fewer students.
Yeah.
That would be, yeah, and you're right on that, Abby. And sometimes that's because you know, we're a municipal district, we're talking about one municipality. Other
Yeah.
districts have multiple municipalities, and that's one of the reasons. But it might be interesting just to know, and I agree with you, Abby, the charter is probably the place to start, but it would be interesting to know, what is the breakdown across the state?
Yeah.
That's easy information to get.
Yep. All right.
But once again, like, we're talking about how many people participate in government in a town which already has 7 people at city council. They do not have a problem finding people to run for city council. And since the inception of our school district, this town has grown exponentially. You know, I think it really does make sense to keep up with this.
Okay, so for our next meeting, Abby, thinking the questions that need to be answered are we have the breakdown across the state for numbers of school boards, and the number of folks who have run for seats for the school board in Ellsworth over the past 7 years, 6 or 7 years.
From when we reemerge as a municipal district, perhaps?
That would be great.
'Cause that would be the
Yep.
time when you're looking at the current configuration.
That would be good.
And I do think that this is something that we could all, we have a current policy on this, or is it a current charter? Like, where would we research?
There's charter language that addresses it,
Okay.
but you do have a policy, and I think the policy was put in place when the first board was elected. It talks about the staggered terms and how many are up each year and that type of
I
thing.
just want to know where I can research before this comes up as a topic again.
I want to say Section 2 of the charter and Section B of your school board
Okay.
policy manual.
Thank you, and I'm
I can't tell you the code right now, Beth.
I bet Abby has an idea, so I can ask her too. I bet she does. Because she's been doing some research,
Here's the
so.
thing. If we would like to do something and move forward, Dan Hamilton would like one of us to go to the next city council meeting.
When is the next city council meeting?
You would think I'd know that, right?
Well, you're on vacation technically, I think.
I think
ish.
it must be the 16th or the 17th. I think one question I would ask Abby is this something, if the board ultimately says this is something that they want to do, is this something that you would implement, and maybe the charter says this, that you would implement immediately, or you'd wait until the next election cycle?
Oh, well.
I'm just asking that
That would be a board decision, but I would absolutely think not till the next election.
Okay.
Right. So I think potentially, you said that we would probably, policy committee would probably be meeting this before the next board meeting, potentially?
Well, I'll give you a hint. One of the things that's being brought forth is discussion of dress code. So
Okay.
that might
So
take
that
a
will
little
take
bit
some
of time.
But I think that maybe we could touch on this and at least have an update for the board, so that then we could have an update for city council if there's an update to have. Because our next meeting is the 8th.
I guess I would just ask this question. If it's something that wouldn't be implemented until next November, I'm just wondering about the immediacy of it.
Well-
Not that it's not important, but.
Well, when you say next November, you mean November 2021 or
No,
2021?
it is
November,
August,
3
isn't
months.
it? Yeah, okay.
The next-
I'm sorry, I'm living back in.
Blink!
Well, the
Blink,
next,
and
the next
it's
election
November.
cycle, I believe it begins this month, because this is when you can take out
Yeah,
papers
you're right.
Yep.
Yep.
in August typically.
So we need to be,
So,
if we want to do it, we would need to move fast.
correct.
Holy word.
Oh,
I think we can vote on it. Can we vote on it on the next meeting, or we have to ask city council first?
We can't vote at workshops, but.
No,
we
he
can
said at
vote-
the next
Oh,
meeting.
the next meeting, we
Yeah.
could. Potentially.
Let's just vote on it.
I think you want to know what the process is first, right?
Yes. I
I
think.
mean, how hard is the process?
Oh, you have no idea.
Probably not.
You know, Abby has done research on it already, so she's already invested time. And she probably knows how things will go, so I think
If we have the answers to these questions,
Yeah.
we could
you could
Potentially vote.
on it, yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not really, as I said, 100% sure on timing of everything here, but we meet again before the next city council meeting? So we would be voting before the city council meeting, which Dale would like one of us to be president? If we were to go
Yes,
that route?
that's,
Right?
you're correct, Abby. Your next meeting is August 12th, next Thursday. I believe the council meets the following Monday.
Okay.
Aren't they the third Monday?
Okay, sorry.
So I think what we would be doing is we would be voting to say, yes, we want to bring this to the council
Yeah, I think that's.
to do it.
Is that what they're asking for, Abby?
I think they're asking for us to come talk to the council, so I think that would be the appropriate procedure, is to vote to bring it to the council, then bring it to the council, and then from whatever the council does, I think it would bounce back to us.
So what that would require, we posted the preliminary agenda. I would, and this isn't the vote, by the way, but it would require amending and adding an item to your next Thursday agenda.
Okay.
So publicly, that would be adding an item to address bringing the concept of expanding the size of the Ellsworth School Board to 7 members from 5.
Yep.
Okay. Does that make sense, Abby?
You mean for
Yes.
5 members? Okay. Excellent.
Okay, thanks, Abby.
And then exec.
Okay, so the last item on the agenda is a personnel matter, which is possible executive session.
If you need to go into it.
I think so.
Yeah, I think,
Personally,
Okay.
yeah. And then because it's a workshop, we don't have to come back after, right? Because we're not going to
Correct.
vote on
Right.
anything.
Correct.
And then everyone can leave.
Can
And
all
you're
go
not,
home
you're
and
not
go to
voting to go into executive session, so you can thank everybody for coming.
Yes, thank
Make
you.
sure, have a good night. Once
Drive
everyone's
safely.
departed, and once,
Everybody, thank you administrators for getting all that information for us too.
Yes.
Kelly.